All right. I'm currently ending a pastorate in Visalia, California, and
Mm.
I'm about to go and plant a new church in Clarksville, Tennessee. I'm a member of Disciple Heritage Fellowship, and then my background is actually in apologetics. So I've been around the country and serving the Lord wherever I go.
Mm. Okay. So why Clarksville?
Well, I could give you the really spiritual sounding answer, right?
Mm.
Of I've looked at the stats and there are a ton of lost people there, and that's
Mhm.
true. And because it's near an army base,
Mm.
there's people that rotate in and out, so you can have lots of impact there across the nation as they come in at the army base and then move on. But really, as I prayed about it, I wanted to be close to family, and I knew I was serving far away from family the past 5 years,
Mm.
and my dad's 45 minutes away. So it was both, yes, this is a place to serve, and also I could be there for a sick family member while I'm continuing to serve.
Mm.
So it's a both and.
Yeah. Okay. So are you originally from that area?
Yeah, I'm a Kentucky boy. I grew up in a little bit of everywhere in Kentucky with my dad's job causing him to move around, but home is Corbin, Kentucky, home of
Mm.
the original Kentucky Fried Chicken. In fact, the first church I was a youth leader at and then assistant pastor at is the building Colonel Sanders himself used to attend just on the hill above the original KFC.
That's quite the claim to fame.
Yes. Unfortunately, a lot of people that knew him said that he was not the nicest individual, but he was a good businessman. The original church that he had went to there sold the building to our little non-denominational church at the time, but it was still a neat, like, we're right up on the hill from the original, and Colonel Sanders walked in here and worshiped. It was kind of neat.
Mhm. Yeah. So so you are doing ministry now. What drew you into ministry originally?
Yeah, I feel like I didn't have a choice, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I grew up in a situation where I went to church very occasionally.
Mm.
My mom was a strong believer. My dad had grown up in a strong believing home, but like with many people, he eventually kind of faded back,
Mm.
and he saw a lot of church folks as being hypocrites. In fact, later I would witness to my dad, invite him to church, and say, "Hey, come on, Dad, come to church with us." And he's like, "Ah, it's full of hypocrites." And I said, "See, you'll fit right in." He didn't think it was funny. But I was eventually able actually to baptize him after my mom's passing. And so he is walking with the Lord now, and that's wonderful. But he walked away for many years.
Mhm.
But I felt a tug at various points to do the right thing. And I knew that there was sin, and I knew that there was a God. None of that was a question. I even knew that Jesus was both man and God.
Mhm.
But I didn't get the grace thing until high school. I
Mm.
went to a first priority meeting, and a gentleman whose name I'll never know gave a very clear and simple presentation of, you guys know that there's right and wrong to do, and you know that you can't possibly do right all the time.
Mm.
Here's the good news. It's impossible, but Jesus did it for you. Just submit to him. Let him change you from the inside out. And I remember, we nowadays, some people don't like to use the term sinner's prayer, things like that. But I did that. I was like, "Dear Lord, forgive me for being dumb. I've heard the gospel a bunch of times. It just never clicked that I couldn't somehow earn it or repay you." And so I just submitted. And from that moment forward, I wanted to serve in some way.
Mm.
And very quickly, I was doing vacation Bible school and kids' classes
Mm.
and volunteering at a local youth outreach. And someone thanked me for my ministry. And I said, "What ministry?" At that point, I was, folding chairs or just doing little bits here and there. And then they started to ask me to teach. And as I prayed about what on earth I would say in front of other people,
Mm.
those words, "Thanks for your ministry," echoed back in my head. And it was a supernatural echoing. It wasn't just remembering. And I
Mm.
felt like God said, "Thanks for your ministry." I told my family, and everyone else is like, "Yeah, we've known this is what you were going to do for a while." And so right out of high school, I was launching into ministry, and I'm 39 now. So for 21 years of my life, I've been doing some kind of ministry.
Mm. Wow. Um, what is first priority?
So great question. A lot of folks that go to high school have heard of I've heard of Fellowship of Christian Athletes,
Yeah.
FCA. First Priority is a very similar kind of situation. In fact, the event was like co-FCA First Priority. I think
Okay.
their intent was there was this idea FCA was just for the athletes, and so they wanted to do something else for everybody else.
Okay. So once you received that calling into ministry, what did you do in order to pursue it?
Well, I started serving on the ground right where I was.
Mm-hmm.
Practical mentorship was important. I started filling in and kind of just shadowing my pastor at the time. I'm in what's called a Christian Restoration Church background now, but it's
Mm-hmm.
still like independent, locally governed. We would call ourselves non-denominational. But at the time, I started out in the Southern Baptist world, and I just wanted to learn everything I could. I got to be the youngest person sent to, for those listeners and viewers that know about how the Southern Baptist Convention works. Usually there's little local groups that churches will send people to, an association, and then that'll go kind of up the chain. I got to be one of the youngest people to go just to listen, just to learn. And that's what I did at first. And then I slowly started filling in and teaching more and more and reading. So C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity was one of the first big books that I dove into, getting into Sean McDowell and Josh McDowell. Well, now they're doing it together. When I read it, it was just Josh McDowell's New Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Reading just some devotionals and reading my Bible so much that Revelation actually fell out of my first copy of the Bible. It was a King James version and leather bound, and Revelation just plopped out eventually.
Yeah. Okay. And did you end up going to Bible college after that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I got to encounter lots of mentors, not just my initial pastor, and learn stuff along the way. But I ended up going to Bible college. I wanted to learn as much as I could and be challenged and stretched. So I went to Clear Creek Baptist Bible College. And then eventually after that, I went to Luther Rice. I went to that all online and got my master's in apologetics, which is like one of my favorite subjects still to this day.
Yeah. So why apologetics though?
So I moved around a bit.
Yeah.
And at one point, my wife was finishing her degree as an occupational therapist. There were no jobs nearby. And I was already out where I was serving as an assistant pastor because we had to move around for her. They call it field work. It's like the very last part before you get your license. Well, we were done. So now we need to find a place to call home. We went far and we went to Juno, Alaska. I'd already heard of Josh McDowell. I'd already read C.S. Lewis. But what really laid it on my heart is that my first youth group kids, many of them didn't turn out so great. They wandered from the faith, and I saw a church there, Calvary Fellowship Juno, that was very intentional about their youth program and training their kids to be prepared for the world. And I saw many of them, they went out to college and they came back and they didn't walk away from the faith. And I wanted to do what was working, and I wanted to prepare people for the world outside of the church. Kind of growing up in the Bible Belt, there was a little bit of a church bubble. And as I began to travel, I saw that I didn't know all the answers or all the challenges I might face. And so I was excited to dig those out myself, but also to equip other people with them. And so I got to eventually be a full-time apologist for a couple of years with Ratio Christi, organize an apologetics conference there and show off an old Yemenite scroll and debate some Muslims. And when I say debate, it was friendly. Actually, we exchanged hugs at the end, right? So didn't have to be vicious, but just bold and loving with the truth.
Hmm.
And I love that stuff.
Okay. And what is Ratio Christi?
So that is an organization. It really spun out of SES, Southern Evangelical Seminary.
Okay.
And the desire is just to equip students with answers to the things they're going to encounter on a college campus, but also they've broadened and also gone down into high school and elsewhere. Just because, frankly, we very often send our Christian students from youth group straight into a battlefield, and it's like sending a soldier to war with crayons. They're not prepared for what they're going to hear, and we would rather give them the answers before they get there. And so I really enjoyed that ministry. It is really challenging, but got to see a lot of impact and fruit from that for people to know, oh, wait, that when my Bible college, or I'm sorry, my Bible class professor at the secular institution says Paul didn't even believe Jesus was God, that there's this crazy guy on campus who can show me in scripture that that was false.
Hmm.
You know?
Yeah. Okay. Uh, so from so you worked with your first church as youth pastor and then associate pastor, and then you went on to Juno, Alaska from there.
Yep. Yes, it did.
Okay. And then
And I loved it there.
yeah,
You
you
really
like all
see
the
God's creation, just the beautiful, the glaciers, the bald eagles, the evergreens, and then of course you can heavens declare, well, looking up the beautiful stars up there, and if you're blessed enough to see it, the northern lights.
Did you get to see those while you were up there?
Not in color. I
Mm.
only got to see kind of the light kind. There was a couple of times they were really good, and I had to work a night shift job in an area with bright lights, and I missed it. But I did get to see kind of like a white sheet almost, is what it kind of looked like.
Okay. And then what brought you to Visalia?
So well, it's a long story. So, but it's a neat story.
Okay.
I had kind of planted a church in Ohio. We moved back from Alaska to be with my mom as she was passing from cancer. And my wife was pregnant with our first son. Well, actually, our first child. I have one son and one daughter.
Mm.
And we were working with the Calvary Chapels at the time. And so we planted a little church. And then we eventually actually merged two little plants together so we could get our first building.
Mm.
And at some point in that, I finished my master's, and I knew something was going to happen after my master's. I didn't want to stay in the area. It was, my mom had already passed. I didn't want to really live there in Ohio. And I felt like after we had merged churches, they had a great team, and I did provide stuff for that team, but I felt like, this isn't, both me and the other pastor don't need to be here. I think either I'll plan again, I'll do something.
Mm.
Well, as my wife and I talked about it, I said I would only go to California if God called. Well, I literally got a phone call from Ratio Christie saying, hey, we want to hire you as a full-time apologist, but you got to go to a training right now in California.
Mm.
And I just kind of laughed. And so I went and did my 2 years with Ratio Christie. But
Mhm.
I missed kind of more the church setting of being a pastor or a youth pastor, and wanted to broaden kind of that out. And I kind of felt like you needed to prepare the whole church,
Mm.
not just the college kids when they get to campus.
Yeah.
At that point, many of them I was putting a Band-Aid on damage that was already done.
Mm.
And so I remembered that I'd only go to California if I was called, and I kind of laughed about it, but I looked online and applied. And at the time it was called First Christian Church of Visalia.
Mm.
And they were looking for somebody who would help an older church get in some younger families, make some transitions, and modernize the church
Mhm.
and be more evangelical. They had gone through a split where they were a member of the Disciples of Christ, and many of the folks had gone with that denomination and approved of ordaining homosexuals that were active, and actually had written a letter basically saying, if you believe Jesus is the only way to heaven, then you really can't have a part of us, that's hateful and backwards. And so this church said, that's not for us. We're going to stand on God's word. And now we need a young guy to help us kind of recover from all this
Mm.
and move in the next direction. So they brought me out here, and I served 5 years out here, a
Okay.
little over actually. And I'm still in the office, even though I'm technically off staff. You can see I've packed up most of my books behind me.
Yeah. Okay. And now you're going to go plant another church?
That is the plan. So I love ministry. I love working with people. I love reaching out to new people and bringing them in.
Yeah.
I found in the 5 years here, I'm very thankful for the process that we've had here.
Mm-hmm.
Took a church about 90 in attendance, about 40 4 of them passed away
Mm.
in the 5 years I was here. Their average age was 65 plus.
That's
So
a
we
funeral of a
really
ton.
have gotten younger here.
Yeah.
We really streamlined a lot of the rules and the process. But as it was becoming clear, I wanted to head back home, and the church that was here before the split had bought a pretty large building. It was getting difficult to afford that building. We had never recovered all the way. The highest we got back up to was 150 from before that split that happened before I got here. There was this idea, well, you want to go be closer to your dad. We can't afford a building. What comes next? And so we actually invited a friend of mine who already had a church here in town, bigger numerically, but very tiny building. And we invited him in, and I got to help hand that off to him. And
Okay.
so what started when I got here as a very traditional, inward focused church
Mm.
is now a large missional church that has merged these two together. And so I think of it as mission accomplished. It's exactly what they asked me to do when they hired me.
Mhm.
Some of the staff were absorbed in, some of the leadership still
Mm.
around, but it's a new and healthier structure than what was there, and that they knew they needed to change when I got here. And so
Yeah.
I feel like mission accomplished. Now it's time to get closer to family. And I think there are churches, this church had a 167-year history.
Mm.
There are extra challenges with an older church.
Mm.
It's been said that today's problems are because of yesterday's victories, and things that worked in the past are sometimes hard to let go of. It's
Yeah.
hard to come in and kill a sacred cow, or even let a sacred cow starve to death,
Mm.
when you need to adjust. And a lot of churches in our country, they come from a time before the internet. They come from a time when most people were expected to go to church. They use terms that are confusing to the unchurched. When I got here, I would hear terms like narthex. Do you know what a narthex is?
No.
Right? Okay, so neither did I till I got here. It's a name for what we would call the lobby. And churches used to sometimes be built where the narthex and the chancel would line up in a certain way, where the congregation, if they're looking at the chancel, that's what we would call the stage, and the pulpit, they would be facing east.
Mm.
And I'm like, I thought that sounds like a Muslim thing to me, but that was a high church kind of thing, and
Mm.
there's nothing wrong with some of that, but when you do it in a way that the unchurched can't relate, you invite your friend that you want to see come to know Jesus. They come in, and from their perspective, it's like they walk into a building full of people doing Gregorian chants and wearing pilgrim hats. They feel so out of place. It feels, like they're going back in time, and it
Mm.
immediately turns them off.
Yeah.
And so a new church plant excites me because I can meet people right where they are, not have to adjust some expectations,
Mhm.
and just bring them to the truth and help them get it in a way that they understand, without having to worry about, you know, this older veteran is going to be upset that when we remove the flag from the stage, or, this person donated that pew or donated that thing, so you can't adjust that. It'll be more freeing. And so I'm excited about it.
Okay. Uh, yeah. Uh, with planting multiple churches like that, so the first one, were you with an organization when you did that?
No, the first church I planted, it was very, very wild. I literally did the old school knock on doors in the neighborhood.
Okay.
The pastor at the Calvary Chapel I was attending actually passed away right in the process, and they brought in another Calvary Chapel. And so another pastor actually was on staff with Greg Laurie, if you know who that is, to take over that Calvary Chapel for a while.
Okay.
And there was a very loose connection there, where I would go there on Sundays, and we would have a small group on Thursdays with the intent to eventually have a Sunday service
Mm.
about 45 minutes away from the main church.
Mm.
Well, I didn't have any training in that. My training was all how to minister in an established church, basically, and a lot of counseling. Even though I liked apologetics, a lot of pastoring is going to the hospital, holding someone's hand, looking in their eye, making sure they know they're not alone, and just being there. And I could do a lot of that, but I was really stretched in, all right, now I've got to meet somebody who thinks church stuff is crazy, who doesn't believe in Jesus, or who has tons of questions, maybe ones I've never even thought about before because I grew up in a Christian home. So I would say that was a challenge. We grew up to about 15 people before we ended up merging together. And then that church, the two plants, that merged church lasted all the way until in the middle of COVID. Finally, it was struggling, and some key people moved, and it kind of closed. But now I actually am working with some organizations, two, in fact.
Oh.
Nexus is a church planning group that comes from the Christian Independent Church. And I actually had to go through an assessment. So my wife and I both went together. We got asked all kinds of questions by a psychiatrist. They examined our finances. They listened to messages. They looked at how entrepreneurial we were, how we handled pressure and change. And then they made us do a ton of assessments like personality tests and those kinds of things to help see if we were ready. And we were. They partner with anyone that scores above a 3, and maybe Paul would have scored a 5, and I scored a 3.48. And they say most pastors of a traditional church score a 2.5 or 3.
Okay.
And so I was really thankful for that. And they are going to continue to mentor me. I'm also doing for the first time, a church plant with Disciple Heritage Fellowship. And so I podcast as well. So I do the Disciple Heritage Fellowship podcast, or the DHF podcast. And we've had some wonderful folks on there. And it is a ministry that is largely made up of folks that were conservative and sticking to the Bible when they felt the disciples of Christ were compromising on key issues. For instance, this past year at the Disciples of Christ's annual conference, they had drag queen bingo and some of those kinds of things. And so we actually have more people that have reached out to us to join kind of our loose fellowship of churches. But typically what DHF has done is provided support for churches that are in that Restoration Stone Campbell movement. And that was just a movement by some individuals long before non-denominational was a thing, that said, hey, we got 5 Methodists, 2 Baptists, and 3 Presbyterians in this town. How about we just worship God and agree to disagree on the non-essentials? And obviously it's a little more complex than that. I don't want to give like a full history lesson, but that's really how they grew. And so we want to keep that DNA alive. Well, rather than just helping the churches that have existed for a long time with that DNA, for the past couple of years, we've been talking about launching a new church. I've been on the board, and I thought I was going to be supporting some other guy. But at some point, my wife, the Lord, through my wife and some other folks, all kind of pointed out, like, you've been a cheerleader. You want to be close to your dad. And you've got this, you've progressed where you're at to this point where you were, this was mission here. You've checked the box to get that complete. Why aren't you the one planning? And, I think it was one of those cases like my ministry call where a lot of people figured it out before I did. And so I submitted myself to that plan, and we actually are planning the Stone Christian Church in Clarksville. I have 2 families coming with me from California is the plan, and maybe one from Illinois, and a couple folks we know on the ground already. And I'm in that process of learning how to build a team, how to make sure positions are in place. And we're really excited about it. It's going to be a joint effort. We want to do things the way they did in Acts. So there's going to be some accountability there. And it's also not just going to be like one lone man going. It'll be some people going with me to make sure that we're holding each other accountable and complementing each other.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about that, that organization you were saying, that group of churches. You're on the board for that, right?
Yeah, Disciple Heritage Fellowship. So it started out as Discipleship Renewal, or Disciple Renewal, I believe in the early 80s. So before I was born, I'll confess, just a couple of years. And they were seeing a drift theologically leftward. Uh, and they're saying there's a lot we can agree to disagree on. A lot, we don't care about what your eschatology is, and in fact, in DHF, what level you think women can serve in ministry. There's no official stance on that. So at my church, a woman can be a senior pastor. At some other churches, that might change, and at some churches, they can't even, be a deaconess. And so it's all across the board. But there's certain things that we're pretty solid on, and that we think are common sense. And DOC was starting to drift on. Now, sex is great, but it's like fire. This is someone else stole the analogy, or I'm stealing an analogy from someone else. Fire's great when it's in the fireplace. It's bad when it's on your curtains, right? So it has its place in marriage, and that's where it needs to stay. And we certainly don't need to allow or endorse ordained pastors who are engaging in inappropriate behavior. And then we go into the pluralism thing where they think ultimately all roads lead to heaven. And no, that contradicts Jesus. He says, I am the truth, the way, and the life. No man gets to the Father but through me. And so many of those churches decided to side with Jesus, but they were so used to connecting together in some way that even though they didn't want a denomination, they wanted to fellowship. And so today we have a annual conference for pastors, and it doesn't have to just be DHF or Christian Restoration pastors. It mostly is. We've got a few folks, like I came really from the Calvary Chapel world, is where I spent most of my time. We got folks like me who've come in afterwards. And then we also have pastoral Zoom groups, because a lot of our folks don't realize this. And unfortunately, some pastors don't realize this, but pastors got to go to church too. We need peers that can pull on us and recognize when we're tired or we're doing too much, or even challenge us when we have a wrong idea. And that needs to happen outside of the flock that we're serving. And so we have these pastor Zoom groups where we study a book together, and we take turns. And so maybe I'll pick an apologetics book, and the guy who wants to pick the prayer book, he'll kind of groan through it and he'll learn. And then we'll go through the prayer book that he wants to pick, and I'll go, oh, this wouldn't have been what I picked, but you know what, I learned from it. And so we'll grow each other that way. We also provide services like spiritual health assessments for a church, helping connect. We have to do it very carefully. We don't officially recommend, but we help connect pastors who don't have a church with churches that are looking for pastors. And the stats for that right now are insane. There are far more pastors leaving the ministry than there are entering the ministry. And many of those that are entering the ministry from seminary want to join a large team. They don't want that lead pastor position in a medium to small size church. And so most of DHF churches are medium to small. We have a few churches that are 2,000 or so, but most are smaller. And so we just kind of network together. One instance would be that I benefited from. We were installing cameras during COVID.
Okay.
Made the DHF connection. Hey, we need help with this particular program. They said, no problem. Hold on, and we'll have someone from so-and-so church call you that did and that installed that program and knows how to use it. Got a phone call. Meanwhile, over here, I have two nearby churches that are part of DHF, and they're a little smaller than the Fountain were. And so sometimes the pastors need a vacation. I would get a call up. Hey, can you send pulpit supply 30, 45 minutes drive over our way for such and such dates? Absolutely, I can do that. I'm blessed with a few extra teachers. And so without having control over one another, we support one another.
That's awesome. So what does being on the board look like for you?
It's a once a month meeting online and once a year in person. And we have some impact on some of the things that go. We have kind of our flagship. I'm a nerd. In fact, I have my coaster right here is Star Trek coaster, Captain. But we have a flagship church, First Christian Church Decatur. Okay. And they have some staff that they kind of lend to us. And they do a whole lot of the conference planning. But for the board, we we look over, provide financial accountability, kind of help with some of the churches, help steer. We have one full-time, fully DHF employee. His name is Rick Grace. He's the church liaison. And so he kind of reports to us, even though he's really my mentor, but he reports to us and we kind of get to check things out like that. And then now the board is heavily involved in this church plant that I'm going to be doing and how that partnership may look like and stuff like that. We get to do some of those big picture things. And then we leave it to Rick and some of the team that work part-time from FCC Decatur to work out the details. And we're expected to help in some way, maybe do a breakout session at the conference, or like me, I'm doing the podcast for us, that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah. So just to stick in that area a little bit more, what does the podcast look like? Is that meant for pastors to
It
watch?
really is meant for church leadership. That's what we're going for. Not necessarily just pastors, though. Youth pastors, elders, volunteers that are very active, missionaries. And then some episodes are broader, but in general, we steer that way. We interviewed a lady named Ronna Swanson, probably our most listened to and watched, which it's on Apple. It's on pretty much everything. I like the YouTube version myself. But it's definitely our most watched and I believe most listened to. And she just shared the story of processing losing her daughter at a young age. And that's one of those episodes where that's for everybody.
Yeah.
Right. So it doesn't matter if you're a pastor or not. But then we had an author named, just went blank, Matthew Bates, Dr. Matthew Bates. I almost said Scott McKnight, but that is a different author. Dr. Matthew Bates on, and he wrote a book called Gospel Allegiance. And actually, I'd really recommend everybody read it. But it's a little, I would say, challenging and really talking about that. Really, we were talking more at leadership level. And then if they caught it, they could pass it down.
Okay.
So it just kind of depends episode to episode. We shoot for about 30 minutes and we shoot for about 2 a month.
All right. Yeah. Interesting. Do you do those in person or online?
They're all online, a lot like we're doing now. And it's been fun. I learned how to do some of this stuff actually by doing some nerd podcasts back in the day. I got to teach an older voice actor who was Duke in the 80s, G.I. Joe cartoon. He was in Speed Buggy, things like that, how to use Skype. And so hearing him maybe say some inappropriate jokes in cartoon character voices was an interesting thing for me, having grown up hearing him. But I took that kind of knowledge and moved it over to Zoom, and we record there, and then I edit in Adobe Premiere. And I edit for content, and then I have another gentleman who's really good with sound named Fred Sarmon, who works at FCC Decatur, and he goes back over and he'll tweak the sound and add some music underneath in just the right way. He's a little better at that than me. He's a lot better at that than me. And so he gives it the final pass and then uploads.
Okay. Yeah, I just started this podcast like a week and a half ago. So just me.
I know I saw the post and instantly replied, things like that. It's great to be starting these things out and connecting with one another. And I've seen you had a mental health professional on a little bit, and I've got that bookmarked to watch.
There you go. Don't forget to subscribe and all that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of channels I can subscribe with, that way I can do more than one.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, it's a fun process. So I wanted to ask, with being connected to so many different churches and having worked with so many churches, what are the needs and problems that you're seeing around the country for churches?
So being a part of DHF is, and then coming from a background where I worked with, I moved around, worked with Calvary Chapel for a while too, got to connect with those pastors at some conferences. I could say that a lot of pastors are dangerously lonely. They're dangerously tired. So our pastors need to connect with other people. Even if you are a independent church, I'm not saying you have to be a part of a denomination. We're not. But you need some other people around you. And pastors are not resting appropriately. And I was challenged by this too. The first year I worked here, I went an entire year without a single day off. And that was terrible. It was bad for my family. It was bad for me. A book called Emotionally Healthy Leader by Peter Scazzaro was really my journey in fixing some of the imbalance in my life and having a Sabbath rest, not a legalistic thing, not like a sundown on Saturday, nothing like that. Okay. But just having about a 24-hour period a week that it was rest and it was family and it was not church work. Pastors report loneliness at higher rates, depression at higher rates. Over 50% of pastors are on some kind of anti-anxiety or antidepressant medicine. And that just tells you we have a mental health crisis among our pastors. And it's because they're overworked. And if you're not a pastor and you're listening, please love on your pastor. It's okay to call and interrupt. It's okay to text. That's what they're there for. But pray for them. Make sure that they know that you appreciate them. And yes, I said it's okay to call and interrupt, but if it's your dog stubbed their toe at 2 a.m., wait till in the morning. I did get a phone call one time. It was very serious that I was hours away. Someone was suicidal. I could not get to them, but I got one of our elders to them. And then I went back to my vacation with my family. And they were actually very upset at me. But please keep in mind that your pastor is probably dealing with a lot of people, not just that show up on Sunday morning. In fact, a lot of the people that I spend a lot of time with aren't able to be there on Sunday morning, right? And so there's a lot of folks that a pastor needs to care for. Give them some grace and patience. But those are the big things. And then we do have a kind of a lag behind the way the world really is in the church world. I know where I'm at now, I had members that could remember when this town was 30,000 and a farm town.
Yeah.
And yet it's 150,000 now and as a city, and the average person moving in is from the left coast in California with a very different mindset than the more rural, traditional Central Valley mindset. And many churches are struggling to adjust the, hey, I have to be a part of a missional community, and my neighbor is even more different than me than I realize, and how I connect with them. And that's hard. I get it. It's hard, but that's what we're called to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I lived in Fresno for a couple of years and Visalia for a few summers. And
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I was like, hey, finally someone from the West Coast from an area I know. And then now you're heading back east.
Yep, heading back to Tennessee. But yeah, I love the area. There's such access to beautiful mountains. I've got a cousin stopping by soon, so we can take them up to the Sequoias before I get out of here, and all that stuff. And Fresno's really nice too. But how long has it been since you have been here?
I was living in New York this past year doing missions. Then recently moved to Chico, California. This at the beginning of this year, and I have some family living in Clovis in Fresno area. So I was there a few weeks ago.
Okay, awesome. Well, you've seen some of the changes then, and one of our elder. There's a couple. One's an elder, one's a deacon. We allowed female elders, especially married couples, they would serve together. Not an essential for me if you disagree polity-wise, but they'll go to Chico quite often, so I'm very familiar with the area. They got family there. Yeah.
There you go.
So that's neat.
Yeah. Okay. So moving forward, what do you see as your future in ministry? Planning a church, of course.
That's my goal is always to replace myself as well.
Yeah.
So having Timothy's is really important for me. And so we have a strategy that I'll be doing a small group with some existing Timothys that'll be coming with me, but I'll try to find some folks as well. But I'm looking at something called the Bonhoeffer Project to help me streamline how I do discipleship, to make sure that I'm most effectively discipling people to then go disciple people. I would love to, once we get the church plant going, make another trip. I recently went to Poland and Ukraine on a mission trip, and I'd love to do that again. I'll keep serving with DHF as long as they have me, but my mind is like strategizing about that church plant. We've got plans to adopt a local school and just fill their break room with some donuts and coffee or something once a month, just to know they appreciate them. That community involvement kind of thing. That's what I'm looking forward to, is just digging in and getting to know my neighbors there and letting them know we're there so that we can build a bridge to get them to Jesus.
Okay. Yeah. So probably have another 10 churches to be planted.
Well, the average, let's see, I forget what the stat is, so forgive me, I'm going to get it wrong. But there's like 6,000 people for every one church in the United States, something like that. And most of them are not mega churches.
Right.
So I know that we have a lot of churches that need pastors, but we actually really do need more churches. And so the hope is that this church will be the first of many DHF church plants. We're even looking into, there's a new model out there, and it's not concrete yet. Got some things to figure out, of launching a coffee shop and church at the same time, so that you can have jobs for your staff and a place to meet. And that's where a lot of folks do community anyways, is a coffee shop. And so that kind of strange entrepreneurial thing is something I'm very interested in. Here on the West Coast, which you're as well, they do that with gyms and daycares as well, with some success. I love to work out, but I don't know that I could do the gym. That's hard to move a lot of equipment for a Sunday service. And I love my own kids, but I don't know that I could do a daycare. That's a lot of paperwork. So the coffee shop is the one that's catching my eye right now, but we're digging into it as a possibility. But I think more of that, and trend-wise, it looks like we're trending back towards more bivocational pastors, or what's called co-vocational pastors, where they have a job that meets their need and they don't want to be full-time, just because church giving is radically down across the board. And church costs are radically up. It takes more to be connected to the community in a tech-savvy world. So I plan on figuring that out myself as I go forward.
Okay. So just a couple of questions left for you here, but what are some books that you would recommend to people looking to start their first church plant, or young pastors in general?
I've got some books to read myself, and unfortunately I've packed some of my good books up. But no, don't have it in front of me. I recommend for everybody, for the sake of evangelism, read Tactics, a Game Plan to Sharing Your Faith by Greg Kokel. I think it's a wonderful way to evangelize. As far as church planning, I'd recommend, and really just leadership in general, I'd recommend Todd Bolsinger's Canoeing the Mountains. I think that line I said earlier about today's problems are from yesterday's successes or victories, I think that's a Todd Bolsinger line. But he talks about how we need to kind of collaborate differently and just navigate a culture that's very different than 20 years ago. And I think those are both like key books to read.
Okay. Well, and if anyone wants to find out more about the podcast or the Disciples Heritage Fellowship, how would they reach out to you?
Discipleheritage.org is the website, and we're right on YouTube, but it's all right there on the website. It's easy to click from there. And then if you want to connect with me personally about the plant, today I just turned on the email sam@thestone.cc. So if anyone wants to follow what we're doing in the church plant, you could shoot me an email. I can sign you up. We'll be shooting out newsletters, things like that. And one kind of bonus plug, if I can, if you happen to like scary stuff, moderately scary stuff, I did write a book about the Templars called "The Templars Survive Beneath Us," and have like a toy line with my kids I've designed. And so it's my outlet to do something creative and fun.
Yeah.
So that's on Amazon, and you just search my name and Templars. It's there.
That's awesome.
Oh, there's nothing like, my kids love the Five Nights at Freddy's stuff and all that. They're at that right age. And I grew up loving C.S. Lewis. If I can sneak in additional teaching in fiction, as much as I love apologetics, I'll use the arguments, I'll ask the questions, but sometimes it's a story that really gets to people's hearts. And so, like, even though this is about scary skeletons, it actually features a Muslim coming to Christ. And so, like, I think that'll reach people differently than the direct church work. And I want to use every tool in the tool bag.
Amen. Well, thank you for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Elliot. And if you ever want to, use a connection, invite someone I know like Rick Grace from DHF, something like that, to be on the podcast, absolutely. And if you've got something passionate on your heart, I'd love to have you on the DHF podcast to talk about that sometime too. And maybe we can, cross connect that way.
Yeah, definitely.